May 2nd, 1945, 10:47 hours. Nordhausen, Germany. Dr. Wernher von Braun stands in the ruins of the Mittelwerk underground factory with his hands raised above his head. 33 years old, tall, angular face showing exhaustion from weeks of fleeing Allied advance. American troops surround him. 45th Infantry Division, rifles aimed, faces showing the particular exhaustion that comes from liberating concentration camps. Behind them, through the tunnel entrance, lies Mittelbau Dora, where 20,000 prisoners died building the weapons von Braun designed. His SS uniform has been hastily replaced with civilian clothes, but the Americans know exactly who he is. The technical director of the Nazi V2 rocket program, the man whose vengeance weapons killed 9,000 civilians in London and Antwerp. He expects arrest, war crimes trial, execution, probably. This is the engineer who made rockets that could reach the edge of space and made them using slave labor that died by the thousands in underground factories where sunlight never penetrated. Now he's captured by the army of the nation, his weapons terrorized, standing amid evidence of atrocities that will define the word genocide. Everything points to Nuremberg, to prosecution, to justice, delayed but finally arriving. But what happens in the next 6 months will rewrite every assumption about post-war accountability. Not through mercy, not through forgiveness, but through Cold War pragmatism that decides technical knowledge matters more than moral reckoning. This is the story of Operation Paperclip, how 1,600 Nazi scientists, many with war crimes documented in their files, became American citizens and helped build the space program. How the engineer standing in those ruins, expecting execution, would instead put Americans on the moon. This is the story of the deal America made. And whether that deal was redemption or just buying expertise at the cost of justice, to understand how this impossible transaction happened, we need to understand who Wernher von Braun was. And that story begins 20 years earlier, with a boy reading about rockets and dreaming of stars. The Rocket Men, March 23, 1912. Werner Magnus Maximilian Freiherr von Braun is born in Würsitz, East Prussia, to an aristocratic family. His father is a baron, his mother descended from medieval royalty. The family is wealthy, educated, connected to German elite circles. Werner grows up with every advantage: private tutors, classical education, exposure to arts and sciences. Nothing about his childhood suggests he'll become history's most morally complicated engineer. At 13, he reads Hermann Oberth's The Rocket into Planetary Space. The book is technical, filled with mathematics and physics that should bore a teenager. Instead, it obsesses him. The idea that humans could build machines to escape Earth's gravity, could travel to other worlds, could transform from planet-bound species into spacefaring civilization. This becomes his singular focus. Not weapons, not politics. Space travel. Exploration. The dream of reaching beyond the sky. But there's a problem with dreams, especially expensive dreams involving experimental rocket technology. They require funding, institutional support, resources that 13-year-old boys, even aristocratic ones, don't possess. By 1930, von Braun is 18 and studying mechanical engineering at Berlin Technical University. He joins the German Rocket Society Verein für Raumschifffahrt, a group of enthusiasts building experimental rockets on shoestring budgets. They're hobbyists, dreamers, people who believe space travel is possible despite everyone else thinking they're crazy. The society includes other names that will later become famous: Hermann Oberth, Willy Ley, Klaus Riedel. They launch small rockets that sometimes explode, sometimes fly, always teach them something about propulsion and aerodynamics. The work is thrilling, but it's also frustrating. Building rockets that can actually reach space requires resources the society doesn't have. They need wind tunnels, test facilities, expensive fuels, advanced materials, professional engineers. All of this costs money they'll never possess through private funding. Then, in 1932, the German army comes calling. Captain Walter Dornberger, heading the Army's rocket research program, attends a Rocket Society demonstration. He watches von Braun's team launch a liquid-fueled rocket that flies 300 feet before crashing. It's crude, but Dornberger sees potential. More importantly, he sees a brilliant young engineer who might solve the Army's problem, developing long-range artillery that can strike enemies beyond traditional gun range. He makes von Braun an offer. Join the Army's rocket research program. Receive funding, facilities, resources. Pursue graduate studies while developing military rockets. It's everything von Braun needs to advance his space travel dreams. It's also a deal with consequences he doesn't fully calculate. Von Braun is 20 years old, ambitious, focused on technical challenges rather than political implications. He tells himself the military funding is temporary, that he'll develop the technology for the Army, but eventually redirect it toward peaceful space exploration. That rockets are just machines. What matters is whether they reach space, not what payload they carry. He accepts. This is the first moral compromise, the moment where the dream of space travel becomes entangled with weapons development. Von Braun will later claim he had no choice, that rocket research was only possible through military funding. But other engineers refused similar offers. Other scientists chose different paths. He had a choice. He chose ambition over ethics. January 30th, 1933. Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. The political landscape transforms overnight. The Weimar Republic, already weakened, collapses. Nazi ideology begins reshaping every aspect of German society. The rocket program, previously a minor army project, becomes strategically important. Hitler wants wonder weapons, super weapons, technology that will terrify enemies and prove German superiority. Rocket research funding increases dramatically. In 1937, the Army establishes a massive facility at Peenemünde. On the Baltic coast, hundreds of scientists, engineers, technicians, state-of-art laboratories, testing grounds, production facilities. Von Braun, just 25 years old, is appointed technical director. He's the youngest person at that level in any German military program. He has resources beyond his wildest dreams. He also has new colleagues. Many are brilliant engineers like himself, but others are Nazi party members, SS officers, people who joined the program because Hitler personally prioritized it. The research facility becomes increasingly militarized, increasingly connected to the Nazi state apparatus. Von Braun joins the Nazi Party in 1937. Later, he'll claim it was necessary to keep his position, that refusing would have meant dismissal or worse. But thousands of German scientists and engineers refused party membership and continued working. Membership was encouraged, sometimes pressured, but not strictly mandatory for technical staff. He joined because it made his life easier, because it removed obstacles, because ambition justified compromise. In 1940, he joins the SS. This is harder to explain away. SS membership was absolutely voluntary. No one was forced to join Heinrich Himmler's paramilitary organization. Von Braun will later claim he was pressured by Himmler personally, that refusing would have endangered the rocket program. But the historical record shows SS membership brought privileges, higher security clearance, better access to resources, protection from political interference. He joined for career advancement. For the dream, the compromises accumulate, each one justified by the goal, each one making the next easier. October 3rd, 1942. Peenemünde. The team achieves what no human has achieved before. The A4 rocket, later renamed V2, launches successfully, reaches an altitude of 84.5 kilometers, crosses the boundary of space. It's the first human-made object to leave Earth's atmosphere. The rocket works perfectly, technically flawless, a triumph of engineering. Von Braun is ecstatic. At the celebration that night, He reportedly says, "The rocket worked perfectly except for landing on the wrong planet." He means Mars, his dream destination. The joke reveals his mindset. This weapon that will kill thousands is just a stepping stone to space exploration. But the wrong planet is Earth. These rockets will land on London, on Antwerp, on civilian neighborhoods where people are sleeping or eating dinner, or living their ordinary lives before being obliterated by supersonic explosives they never hear coming. Hitler orders mass production. The V2 becomes the Vergeltungswaffe vengeance weapon number 2. Its purpose isn't military effectiveness, it's terror, demoralization, revenge for Allied bombing of German cities. The rocket is too inaccurate for military targets, too expensive for its destructive power, but it's psychologically devastating, invisible, unstoppable, arriving faster than sound. Von Braun has achieved his technical goal. His rocket can reach space. Now it will be used to kill civilians. Does he refuse? Does he resign? Does he sabotage production? He continues. Later, he'll say he had no choice. But he never tries to exercise choice, never makes even symbolic resistance. He commits fully to mass-producing the weapon, improving its reliability, increasing its range. The dream requires this. The path to space goes through London. By 1943, Allied bombing is devastating Peenemünde. The facility is too vulnerable for critical war production. Hitler and Himmler order rocket production moved underground. The location selected, Konstein Mountain near Nordhausen. Inside, old mining tunnels that will be expanded into massive subterranean factory. Labor source, concentration camp prisoners. This is where Operation Paperclip's moral complexity becomes impossible to ignore. This is where the cost of von Braun's dream gets paid in currency of human suffering. Mittelbau-Dora begins as subcamp of Buchenwald, then becomes independent concentration camp in October 1944. Prisoners come from across Nazi-occupied Europe. Political prisoners, resistance fighters, Jews, Soviet POWs, anyone the regime wants eliminated through work. They're told they'll be building underground facilities. They're not told they'll be building weapons. They're not told most of them will die. The conditions defy comprehension. Prisoners work 18-hour shifts, excavating tunnels, installing machinery, assembling rockets. They live underground for weeks at a time. No sunlight, no fresh air, stone dust filling lungs, constant noise from drilling and machinery. They sleep in caverns on wooden boards. Food is starvation rations. Watery soup, moldy bread. Water is contaminated. Sanitation is buckets that overflow. The death rate is catastrophic. Prisoners die from malnutrition, disease, exhaustion, accidents, beatings, executions. Guards kill prisoners suspected of sabotage, real or imagined. Bodies are burned in crematoriums or buried in mass graves. Production quotas matter more than human life. If a prisoner dies, another one replaces him. 20,000 prisoners die at Mittelbau-Dora. 20,000 human beings, each with name, family, dreams, lives, interrupted and ended, killed to build von Braun's rockets. More people die building V2 seconds than die from V2 attacks. The weapon kills more through production than deployment. Von Braun visits Mittelbau-Dora. Multiple documented visits. He sees the conditions. He sees the prisoners skeletal, exhausted, dying. He sees guards beating them. He sees corpses. He supervises production, inspects quality, solves technical problems. He knows exactly what's happening. The slave labor isn't hidden from him. He participates in managing it. After the war, he'll claim ignorance. I didn't know about the concentration camp conditions. But the historical record contradicts this. Documents show his presence. Testimony from survivors describe seeing him. He knew. He saw. He continued anyway because the rockets needed to be built and his dream required those rockets. This is the unforgivable part. Not that he developed weapons many scientists did during wartime, Not that he worked for Nazi Germany, he was German, living under dictatorship, but that he built his dream on foundation of slave labor he personally witnessed, that he saw human beings dying to make his rockets and decided the rockets mattered more. The V2 becomes operational in September 1944. Over the next 7 months, approximately 3,000 volts 2 rockets are launched at Allied targets. 1,358 hit London, killing 2,754 people and injuring 6,523. Others hit Antwerp, Liège, Paris, various cities. The military impact is negligible. V2 seconds are too inaccurate for tactical targets, too expensive to affect war's outcome. But the psychological impact is significant. The terror is real. So, the final accounting: 20,000 prisoners dead in production, 9,000 civilians dead from attacks, 29,000 deaths connected to von Braun's rockets, and the war is still not over. April 1945. Germany is collapsing. Soviet forces advance from the east, American and British from the west. The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years is dying in its 12th. Peenemünde is evacuated. Mittelbau-Dora is liberated by American troops who find corpses, crematoriums, and survivors barely alive. Von Braun and approximately 500 key rocket scientists flee south. They're ordered to continue fighting, to defend remaining Reich territory. Instead, they're planning surrender. The question is, surrender to whom? Soviet treatment of German scientists is already known. Harsh interrogation, forced labor, coerced service rebuilding Soviet rocket program. The scientists will be valuable assets, but won't be treated gently. Stalin wants German expertise, but has no interest in making Germans comfortable. American treatment is unknown. Might be better. Might be war crimes, trials. But von Braun is calculating odds. He believes Americans, despite their moral rhetoric, will value his technical knowledge, that they'll need rocket experts for whatever comes after the war, that his expertise is his immunity. He sends his brother Magnus to make contact with American forces. The message: May 1945. Washington, D.C. While von Braun and his team sit in American custody in Bavaria, a different kind of calculation is happening in the offices of the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency. Military intelligence officers are reviewing captured German documents, interrogating scientists, assessing what Nazi Germany achieved technologically. The findings are disturbing. German rocket technology is 10 to 15 years ahead of anything the United States has developed. The V2 can travel over 200 miles, reach speeds of 3,500 miles per hour, carry a 1-ton warhead. American rocket programs are experimental, unreliable, nowhere near this capability. Jet engine technology? The Germans are ahead. Aerodynamics research? Ahead. Chemical weapons? Ahead. The nation that just lost the war was winning the technology race. The second disturbing finding: the Soviet Union is capturing German scientists as fast as they can identify them. Soviet forces occupying eastern Germany are systematically locating technical specialists, offering them choices between cooperation or Siberia, shipping them east by the thousands. Stalin understands exactly what the Americans are realizing: technological advantage in the coming peace might matter more than military strength in the ending war. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency briefs military leadership. Then military leadership briefs President Truman. The message is clear. We have a narrow window to secure German technical expertise before the Soviets monopolize it. The question is whether that opportunity is worth compromising the principles America supposedly fought for. The State Department objects immediately. These are Nazis. Some are war criminals. Bringing them to America, giving them jobs and citizenship, rewards people who should be prosecuted. It sends the message that technical expertise can buy immunity from justice. It contradicts everything America claimed to stand for during the war. The military's response is equally immediate. We're entering a new kind of conflict. The Soviet Union is not going to remain a friendly ally. We need every technological advantage we can secure. Yes, these men worked for Hitler. Yes, some have blood on their hands. But their knowledge didn't die with the Reich. If we don't take them, the Soviets will. And 5 years from now, we'll be facing rockets and weapons designed by Germans working for Stalin. The pragmatic argument wins. It almost always does when national security competes with moral principle. September 3, 1945. President Truman signs off on a program with the innocuous name Operation Overcast. The mission: bring German scientists to the United States for military interrogation and temporary employment. Temporary being the key word officially. These scientists will help transfer their knowledge to American programs, then return to Germany. But temporary becomes permanent. By November, the program is renamed Operation Paperclip, named for the paperclips attached to folders of scientists whose backgrounds have been cleaned up to meet criteria they don't actually meet. The scope expands. The target number grows from hundreds to over 1,600 specialists. The temporary employment becomes permanent immigration. The moral compromises become systematic policy. The official guidelines are explicit. No ardent Nazis, no SS members, no war criminals. Anyone brought to America must have clean record regarding Nazi atrocities. These standards look good on paper. They make the program appear ethical, limited to scientists who happen to work for Germany but weren't personally involved in regime crimes. The reality is systematic falsification. Intelligence officers review dossiers, identify problems, then rewrite the files. SS membership disappears from records. Nazi party affiliation is downgraded to nominal or for career reasons only. Documented presence at concentration camps becomes unaware of conditions. War crimes investigations are quietly closed. Werner von Braun's original security evaluation classifies him as potential security threat and ardent Nazi. His file documents SS membership, party loyalty, presence at Mittelbau-Dora. The assessment recommends against bringing him to America. Too many red flags. Too obviously complicit. Then the file is revised. The SS membership is described as nominal, forced by Himmler for program access. The party affiliation becomes necessary career move, not ideological commitment. The concentration camp visits are reframed. He was there for technical supervision, unaware of broader conditions. The security threat assessment is reversed. New conclusion: no significant Nazi connections, suitable for American employment. The lies are necessary to make politically possible what's already been decided strategically. America wants the scientists. The scientists come with Nazi pasts, so the pasts are erased, rewritten, made acceptable. Arthur Rudolph, production manager at Mittelbau-Dora, directly supervised slave labor that killed thousands. His file is sanitized. He comes to America, eventually becomes project manager for Saturn V rocket that sends Apollo missions to the moon. He receives NASA's highest honor for distinguished service. Kurt DeBoos, rocket launch specialist, was Peenemünde security officer with documented record of denunciations that sent colleagues to concentration camps. His file is cleaned. He becomes first director of Kennedy Space Center, overseeing every Apollo launch. Hubertus Strughold, aviation medicine researcher, conducted experiments on concentration camp prisoners, testing human tolerance for extreme conditions. Some prisoners died in the experiments. His file emphasizes his expertise while minimizing his war work. He becomes father of American space medicine, has NASA facility named after him. The pattern repeats across 1,600 cases. Not every scientist was war criminal. Many were engineers and technicians who did their jobs without directly participating in atrocities. But the men at the top, the directors, the managers, the ones with most valuable expertise, those men knew, they saw, they participated. And Operation Paperclip gave them immunity in exchange for knowledge. September 1000. 945. Fort Bliss, Texas. The first group of German scientists arrives on American soil. 127 rocket specialists, von Braun among them. They're processed by military intelligence, issued American clothes, assigned quarters on the isolated desert base. They're not prisoners. They're not exactly free, either. They exist in strange liminal space valued assets under military supervision. The contracts they sign are clear. 5-year employment with U.S. Army. Work on missile development. Salary significantly higher than they'd make in occupied Germany. Eventual path to citizenship if they cooperate and prove valuable. In exchange, no war crimes, prosecution, no extradition requests honored, complete immunity for anything done before May 1945. For von Braun, this is almost perfect. The prosecution he feared isn't happening. Instead, he's being paid to develop rockets, exactly what he's always wanted to do. The only downside is location. Fort Bliss is isolated, hot, dusty, but it has rocket testing facilities. It has resources. It has everything he needs, except the concentration camp labor. The other scientists adapt with varying degrees of success. Some embrace America, eagerly learning English, adopting American mannerisms, expressing gratitude for the opportunity. Others remain emotionally in Germany, counting days until contracts end and they can return home. Most fall somewhere in between, accepting present reality while uncertain about future. The local response is mixed. Texas newspapers run stories about Nazi scientists working at Fort Bliss. Some coverage is neutral, describing it as necessary Cold War measure. Other coverage is hostile headlines, asking why war criminals are living comfortably in America while concentration camp survivors struggle. Jewish organizations protest. Veterans groups write angry letters. The scientists face resentment that forces them to stay largely on base, isolated from civilian population that doesn't want them there. Von Braun handles the situation by becoming more American than the Americans. He learns English rapidly, loses his accent through deliberate practice. He joins church groups. He gives interviews, emphasizing his love of freedom and democracy, carefully avoiding mention of his Nazi past. He discovers that Americans love optimism, love futurism, love the idea of conquering space. So he becomes the friendly face of American rocketry, charming, enthusiastic, forward-looking. The past is never mentioned unless directly asked, and even then, it's minimized. By 1950, the scientists are moved to Huntsville, Alabama. Redstone Arsenal becomes the center of American missile development. The mission is ostensibly defensive, developing ballistic missiles to counter Soviet threat. But everyone understands the real goal: weapons capable of delivering nuclear warheads across oceans. The rockets that were supposed to explore space are becoming tools for threatening enemies. Von Braun doesn't resist this. He never does. The path to space goes through weapons development. Always has, probably always will. If building missiles for the Army eventually leads to space program, that's acceptable compromise. The dream justifies the means. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, is running its own version of Operation Paperclip. Operation Osoaviakim forcibly relocates over 2,200 German specialists to the Soviet Union in October 1946. The approach is less voluntary than American program. Scientists are given limited choice about cooperation, but the goal is identical: steal German expertise before the other side monopolizes it. The chief Soviet designer becomes Sergei Korolev, but he's supported by German engineers who provide detailed knowledge of V2 technology. The Soviets reverse engineer German rockets, then develop their own designs. By the early 1952s, both superpowers are building missile programs based on Nazi blueprints, taught by Nazi engineers, extending the reach of weapons first used against London and Antwerp. The irony is profound. America and Soviet Union spent 4 years as allies fighting Nazi Germany. Now, they're rivals, employing Nazi scientists to threaten each other. The engineers who built Hitler's vengeance weapons are designing American and Soviet arsenals. The war changed. The weapons got bigger, but the people building them stayed the same. The justification on both sides is identical. If we don't take them, they will. It's strategic necessity. National survival. The Cold War version of prisoner's dilemma, both sides defecting because cooperation is too risky, both sides compromising principles because the alternative is unilateral disadvantage. But there's a question neither side asks. What message does this send? When war criminals face no consequences because their expertise is valuable, what does that teach about accountability? When nations compete to hire people who built their weapons on slave labor, what does that say about moral priorities? The answer is uncomfortable. It says that winning matters more than justice. That technical knowledge can buy immunity from consequences. That the victors in war crimes trials aren't necessarily more ethical than the defendants, they're just more powerful. Von Braun becomes American citizen in 1955. The ceremony is public, photographed, used for propaganda. Former SS officer pledging allegiance to the United States, claiming American values align with his personal beliefs. The journalists don't ask about Middleborough. The immigration officials don't mention the 20,000 dead. The ceremony erases history, replaces it with narrative of redemption and integration. That same year, von Braun appears on Walt Disney's television show explaining his vision for space exploration. He's charming, enthusiastic, explaining rocket mechanics to children in ways that make space travel seem inevitable and wonderful. Millions of Americans watch. He becomes celebrity scientist, the friendly German genius who will help America reach the stars. The transformation is complete. War criminal becomes national hero. SS officer becomes trusted American. The man who built weapons on Mountain of Corpses becomes face of peaceful space exploration. Operation Paperclip didn't just bring scientists to America. It laundered their pasts, gave them new identities, made their crimes disappear into classified files that won't be opened for decades. The victims, the 20,000 who died at Middleborough, the 9,000 killed by V2 attacks, they don't get redemption arcs. They don't get second chances. They get forgotten. Their deaths become footnotes to space-age triumphalism, inconvenient details that complicate the heroic narrative. This is the true cost of Operation Paperclip. Not just moral compromise, but historical amnesia. The decision to value expertise over accountability, to prioritize Cold War competition over justice for victims, to rewrite past in service of present needs. America made a deal. We'll forget what you did if you help us win what comes next. The question that remains is whether that deal was worth it. Whether putting humans on the moon justified protecting mass murderers. Whether Cold War victory excuses Cold War methods. The answer depends on who you ask and whether you count the dead in your calculation. October 4th, 1957. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik. First, artificial satellite. America is shocked, humiliated, terrified. The Soviets reached space first. The Germans working for Korolev beat the Germans working for von Braun. The space race is suddenly real, urgent, existential. Von Braun is positioned as America's answer. The man who can beat the Soviets, restore American prestige, prove capitalist democracy superior to communist dictatorship. His Nazi past is mentioned rarely, minimized when it is, always framed as unfortunate necessity that allowed him to develop expertise America now desperately needs. In 1958, NASA is created. The mission: beat Soviets to the moon. Von Braun and his team are transferred from Army to Civilian Space Agency. The transformation continues, from weapons designers to explorers, from servants of dictatorship to champions of democracy. The narrative rewrite is seamless, but the past doesn't disappear just because it's not discussed. The Saturn V rocket that will carry Apollo missions descends directly from V2. The engineers who design it learned their craft at Peenemünde. The testing procedures come from launches observed by prisoners who didn't survive to see the results. Every achievement of the space program carries shadow of how the knowledge was gained. Operation Paperclip didn't offer redemption. Redemption requires acknowledging wrongs, expressing remorse, making amends. The program offered something else: transaction. Your knowledge for our protection. Your expertise for our forgetting. It was pragmatic. It was strategic. It was effective. But it wasn't justice. And calling it redemption insults the victims whose deaths were considered acceptable cost of technological progress. One 960. Huntsville, Alabama. Wernher von Braun is now director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, overseeing development of the Saturn rocket family. He lives in a comfortable house in the suburbs. His children attend local schools. He's active in the Episcopal Church. He gives speeches at civic organizations about America's destiny in space. His neighbors consider him a brilliant, charming man who happens to have a German accent. Most of them don't know or don't want to know what he did before 1945. The transformation is complete in ways that go beyond paperwork and citizenship. Von Braun has become the face of American optimism about space. When he speaks about reaching the moon, about Mars colonies, about humanity's future among the stars, Americans believe him. His enthusiasm is infectious. His technical credibility is unquestionable. The past is rarely mentioned, and when it is, it's presented as unfortunate circumstance. He worked for the wrong government, but always had noble goals. This narrative erasure is Operation Paperclip's greatest success. Not just bringing scientists to America, but rewriting them as heroes. Not just using their knowledge, but laundering their histories. Von Braun didn't redeem himself through good works. America redeemed him through selective amnesia and public relations. The Apollo program crystallizes this transformation. President Kennedy announces in 1961 that America will land a man on the moon before decade's end. It's audacious, expensive, technically uncertain, but it's also exactly the kind of grand vision that justifies everything that came before. If Apollo succeeds, then Operation Paperclip was worth it. If humans walk on the moon, then the moral compromises that brought Nazi scientists to America will be vindicated by achievement. Von Braun becomes central to this mission. His team designs the Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever built, capable of lifting 45 tons to the moon. It's a direct descendant of the V2. Same basic principles, scaled up through decades of development. The lineage is clear: V2 to Redstone to Jupiter to Saturn. Every generation of American rockets traces back to Peenemünde. The Saturn V is a masterpiece of engineering. 36 stories tall, generating 7.6 million pounds of thrust. So powerful the ground shakes for miles when it launches. It will fly 13 times without a single catastrophic failure, a reliability record unmatched by any rocket before or since. Von Braun's team has created something genuinely extraordinary. But that extraordinary achievement exists because 20,000 prisoners died. building the prototype. Because slave labor in underground tunnels proved the concepts. Because concentration camp victims were worked-to-death testing components. The Saturn V is brilliant. It's also built on foundation of atrocity. July 16, 1969. Kennedy Space Center, Florida. Apollo 11 sits atop Saturn V rocket, ready for launch. Inside the command module, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. They're about to attempt what humans have dreamed about for millennia, traveling to another world. The rocket beneath them is von Braun's creation, the culmination of his life's work. Launch director Kurt Debus, former Peenemünde security officer who denounced colleagues to the Gestapo, counts down. The engines ignite. Saturn V lifts off, carrying 3 astronauts toward the moon. America watches on television, breathless with excitement. The moment is triumphant, historic, transformative. 4 days later, Armstrong steps onto lunar surface. The achievement is genuine, remarkable, worthy of celebration. Humans have reached another world. The dream that obsessed a 13-year-old boy reading about rockets has been realized. Von Braun's vision has come true. But the 20,000 are still dead. The 9,000 killed by V-2 attacks are still dead. They didn't get to see this moment. They died so the technology could be developed. Their deaths are the hidden cost of the space age. The news coverage of Apollo 11 doesn't mention Mittelbau-Dora. The celebration doesn't acknowledge the slave labor. Von Braun gives interviews about humanity's achievement, about America's triumph, about the future of space exploration. Nobody asks him about the past. The questions are all forward-looking, optimistic, sanitized. This is the bargain Operation Paperclip offered. Forget the crimes, celebrate the achievements. Don't ask how the knowledge was gained. Don't count the cost in human lives. Just enjoy the success and ignore the foundation it's built on. For most Americans, this is an easy trade. The moon landing is glorious. Von Braun is a hero. The war ended 24 years ago. Why dwell on ancient history when the future is so bright? For the survivors of Mittelbau-Dora, it's different. They watch the moon landing knowing their suffering made it possible. They see von Braun celebrated while their dead comrades are forgotten. They understand that America valued German expertise more than justice for concentration camp victims. Some survivors speak out. They write letters, give interviews, try to remind the world that the rocket scientist on television supervised factory where they nearly died. The response is minimal. A few newspapers run stories. Most Americans aren't interested. The narrative of redemption and achievement is too compelling to disrupt with uncomfortable truths about how the achievement was made possible. The 1,970 seconds bring renewed scrutiny. Investigative journalists start examining Operation Paperclip's history, uncovering the extent of background falsification. Files are declassified, showing how systematically Nazi pasts were erased. The public learns that war criminals were knowingly brought to America, given immunity, provided comfortable lives. The revelations sparked debate. Was Operation Paperclip necessary? Was it worth the moral cost? Should the scientists have been prosecuted despite their value? The arguments split along predictable lines. Cold warriors defend it as strategic necessity. We needed technological advantage over Soviets. Bringing German scientists was pragmatic. Critics condemn it as normalizing war crimes. Protecting mass murderers for technological gain is morally indefensible. Von Braun is asked directly about his Nazi past in interviews. His answers follow consistent pattern. He acknowledges working for the Reich, but frames it as necessity. All rocket funding came through military. He had no choice if he wanted to pursue his dreams. He denies knowing about concentration camp conditions at Mittelbau-Dora despite documented evidence of multiple visits. He claims SS membership was forced on him by Himmler, though historical records show it was voluntary. The denials are transparent. The evidence contradicts his claims. But he's also 70 years old, dying of cancer, a respected figure who sent humans to the moon. Prosecuting him now seems vindictive. The moment for justice passed decades ago, traded away by Operation Paperclip. June 16, 1977. Werner von Braun dies in Alexandria, Virginia, age 65. Cancer caused partially by the Agent Orange he was exposed to during Vietnam War consultation work. Even in civilian life, his expertise served military purposes. The obituaries are divided. Major newspapers emphasize his space achievements, calling him visionary who made humanity's spacefaring future possible. Alternative publications emphasize his war crimes, calling him mass murderer who escaped justice through Cold War expedients. Both narratives are true. He was brilliant engineer who achieved extraordinary things. He was also Nazi, who built weapons on pile of corpses and never faced accountability. The complexity resists simple categorization. He's neither pure hero nor pure villain. He's something more: uncomfortable, talented person who made terrible choices, served evil regime, then got rewarded by democratic nation that valued his skills more than moral consistency. His funeral draws hundreds. NASA officials, former colleagues, aerospace industry leaders. They remember him as mentor, friend, inspiration. The eulogies emphasize his contributions to space exploration, his vision, his leadership. Mittelbau-Dora is not mentioned. The 20,000 are not mourned. This is celebration of achievement, not reckoning with cost. The decades since have brought gradual reassessment. Modern historians are less forgiving of Operation Paperclip than mid-century Americans were. The moral calculus that made sense during existential Cold War competition looks different now. Did we really need Nazi scientists? Would Soviet technological advantage have been decisive? Did bringing war criminals to America make defeating communism more likely? The answers are unclear. Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 without nuclear war, suggesting the weapons both sides built didn't determine the outcome. The space race produced technological advancement but questionable strategic value. The missiles designed by Operation Paperclip, scientists thankfully were never used in the nuclear exchange everyone feared. So what was gained? What was sacrificed? The balance sheet is complicated. Gained: American rocket program development accelerated by decade or more. Missile technology that provided deterrent during Cold War. Space program achievements that inspired generations. Scientific knowledge that advanced multiple fields. Strategic advantage over Soviet Union in key areas. Sacrificed: justice for concentration camp victims. Moral authority to condemn war crimes. Principle that some acts are unforgivable regardless of circumstances. Accountability for 20,000 deaths at Mittelbau-Dora. Honesty about costs of technological progress. The utilitarian might argue the gains outweigh losses. 20,000 deaths and compromised principles versus potential nuclear deterrence and space achievement. Cold calculation suggests the trade was worthwhile. But utilitarian logic has limits. It reduces human beings to numbers in equation. It suggests everything has price, including justice. It allows present needs to override past crimes. This thinking justified Operation Paperclip. It also justified the concentration camps kill some to benefit many. The logic is dangerous wherever it appears. The truth about redemption is that Operation Paperclip didn't offer it. Redemption requires acknowledgement of wrongs, genuine remorse, meaningful amends. Von Braun never acknowledged full extent of his participation in Nazi atrocities, never expressed remorse beyond vague regret about working for wrong government, never made amends to survivors or families of the dead. Instead, Operation Paperclip offered transaction: technical knowledge in exchange for immunity, expertise in exchange for historical erasure. It wasn't forgiveness or second chance. It was deal where both sides got something they wanted. America got rocket scientists, scientists got protection from prosecution. Calling this redemption insults actual redemption. Real redemption is hard. It requires facing what you did, understanding harm caused, taking responsibility, making things right as much as possible. Von Braun did none of this. He leveraged his value, minimized his guilt, and lived comfortably until natural death. That's not redemption. That's getting away with it. Today, NASA carefully acknowledges Operation Paperclip's history while celebrating its outcomes. The official narrative admits moral complexity, while emphasizing achievements. Yes, Nazi scientists were brought to America. Yes, backgrounds were sanitized. Yes, justice was compromised. But also, humans reached the moon. Technology advanced. The Cold War was won without nuclear catastrophe. This balanced approach attempts to honor both truth and achievement. But balance implies equivalence, that costs and benefits somehow cancel out. They don't. The victims stay dead. The crimes stay committed. Achievement doesn't erase culpability. Landing on the moon doesn't justify Mittelbau Dora. The uncomfortable reality is that modern space program is inseparable from Nazi scientists. Every achievement carries their shadow. When astronauts walk on moon, they walk via technology developed through slave labor. When satellites orbit, they orbit using principles tested on prisoners. When rockets launch, they launch using knowledge gained through atrocity. This doesn't mean abandoning space exploration. The technology exists. The knowledge has been passed to new generations of engineers who bear no guilt for how it was originally gained. But it does mean acknowledging the costs, remembering the victims, refusing the comfortable lie that Operation Paperclip was about redemption rather than expedience. The lesson isn't that America shouldn't have competed in Cold War. The lesson is that winning at any moral cost creates victories built on compromised foundations. That pragmatism defeating principle sets dangerous precedent. That saying, "We need them more than we need justice," teaches future leaders that justice is negotiable when something more important is at stake. Operation Paperclip taught that lesson. And we're still living with the consequences. May 2nd, 1945. Nordhausen, Germany. Werner von Braun stands in ruins, expecting trial. What he receives instead is career, citizenship, acclaim. The man who should have faced judges at Nuremberg instead becomes director of American space program. The engineer whose weapons killed 9,000 and whose factories killed 20,000 becomes national hero, celebrated and honored until natural death in comfortable retirement. This happened because America decided Cold War victory mattered more than war crimes accountability. Because technological advantage outweighed moral consistency. Because the future was considered more important than justice for the past. The decision put humans on the moon. It also normalized protecting war criminals when their expertise is valuable. It established precedent that some crimes can be overlooked if the price is right. It taught that justice is situational, applicable when convenient, ignorable when pragmatism demands. Operation Paperclip wasn't redemption deal. It was transaction where America bought rocket scientists by selling its moral authority, where Nazi engineers purchased immunity with technical knowledge, where the currency of exchange was 20,000 forgotten deaths and principle that some acts are unforgivable. The rockets reached the moon. The victims stayed in their graves. And somewhere in that gap between achievement and accountability lies the true legacy of Operation Paperclip, proof that humans are capable of both extraordinary accomplishment and extraordinary moral compromise, sometimes in service of the same goal. Nazi scientists didn't become NASA founders through redemption. They became NASA founders because America needed them more than it needed justice. That calculation produced the space age. It also produced a generation of war criminals who died peacefully in their beds, celebrated as heroes, their crimes forgotten by everyone except the survivors who had to watch the man who nearly killed them celebrated on television. That's not a story of redemption. It's a story of expedience. And calling it anything else dishonors the 20,000 who died building the rockets that took us to the stars.